Hello, everyone. It's time for the monthly video blog. And I'm Daniel Giamario, and I'm here with Shiva Faranpour. And what we're going to be doing, she's our on our council, and also the one who has recently been doing the organizational work regarding our in-person events. She's doing the same thing for the Faywood event that's coming up in a few months now. Shiva is also going to be the prime facilitator for our upcoming Venus-Mars group, of which we want to discuss why we're doing that and what you can actually expect to learn from it. And so we're going to discuss a variety of things here about the Venus and Mars cycles, particularly at this most significant time, as we're actually we're recording this almost right at the point of the Sun-Venus conjunction and just before a Moon-Venus conjunction, while Venus is in the interior underworld between the Earth and the Sun just before the heliacal rise of Venus around the 19th of August. So this is a really, in my experience, is the most magical or mysterious point of the Venus cycle when it's in this portion where Venus, however we conceive of her, is shifting into a completely different archetypal expression. In this case, after 584 days of exploring the Capricornian mystery school as her overstory, we'll be going into the one that is Leo. And of course, Venus has been in Leo for a while. Actually, every time Venus goes through this metamorphic shift into a new overstory sign, she'll stay in the same sign for a long time. So I mean, I think it's 126 days that Venus is in Leo. So it's only at the heliacal rise that there's the almost like the first breath. I'm here, I'm back, you know. So a very, very auspicious time for us to be talking about this. So I wanted to spend these first few moments in our time together here to give a little background on the genesis of this body of knowledge. It, for me, went back to about 1996, 1997, and this is when I was learning about the synodic cycles. And I was living in the Mimbres River Valley in New Mexico, which is really close to where the Big Stone Circle is and where we're going to be having our event at the time of the eclipse. And it was during that time I was actually spending a huge amount of time in the morning and evening sky looking at Venus and Mars. And there were two purposes for the articles that came out in the Mountain Astrologer at that time period. The first intention was to give individuals further inspiration to be with the sky, to not just know it intellectually or to know it in the left brain way. And so and it was in the midst of that kind of research I discovered certain things about the Venus and Mars cycles that I had never seen anywhere else. That included both for Venus and for Mars. So, but the idea there, though, was to let's get people interested in how the ancients and current people can actually be with these mysteries, you know, directly, experientially. To move it beyond the abstraction, because a lot of astrologers knew about the 77-month cycle of Venus and Mars together, but no one, even astrosophy, was never mentioning about their dance with each other. And that was when there was the discovery of the 6.5-year cycle of which we call the sagas, and that will be an ingredient in the course that we'll be presenting, the group that we're going to be creating for the whole Venus cycle coming up. But the second purpose, and this is, I think, the most important reason why we're having this conversation today, was that Venus and Mars operate together. And Venus is not just about women, and Mars is not just about men. So it's actually the interaction of the two of them that's really important. And just to give you, because I've been at this for a long time. I mean, geez, this is my 54th year of being an astrologer. Okay, so what I noticed was, and this was an important time period, we could say, in the culture. There was a certain book that came out called "Men Are from Mars, Women Are from Venus." And I used to joke around 20 years ago, if there was going to be a book burning, that's one I would throw in the fire. Because what it was, even though it had a slightly more sophisticated psychological approach, it compounded the problem. As if like saying all men are a certain way, all women are a certain way. And it seems to me that what has happened in the last 20 years, as more and more people were discovering the importance of synodic cycles, and particularly Venus, because Venus is a bit easier to understand than the Mars one, which is a longer cycle, that this polarization, this separation, as represented by men are from Mars, women are from Venus, has worsened, because almost every Venus group seems to be only talking about the goddess or welcoming women. In fact, I know that some of the groups that say this is only for women, or it's oriented in such a way that men don't feel welcome. Now, I have nothing whatsoever against people creating groups, all for women or all for men, okay? However, that's not what our school's about, and it's not what the original intention of this material was, which was to see the interaction between Venus and Mars, and to include both. And so, or another way to put it would be that if you're working with the Venus cycle, it's not just for women. And in fact, if you're working with the Mars cycle, of course, it's not just for men. Less knowledge of the Mars cycle is there, but for the first time, there we're going to present through our school the whole Venus cycle, the 584 days, the 19 or so months of it, including the interaction with Mars. And one of the things happening now is what we call the Great Saga, which you'll be able to learn way more about. I think it's super important because from the perspective of this work, we start with the idea, we're all human first, okay? And then 99.5% of human beings, sorry about that, 99.5% of human beings are born XX or XY human beings. And biological sexuality we do consider to be real. But then gender, which is a cultural construct, which would say that whatever sex you are, there are many different expressions of that you can choose to be, which is beyond what, say, patriarchal culture would say, or what the 1950s would say, or even what the current younger generation is saying now, is that there's different possible gender expressions within the framework of masculine and feminine. Now, it is in fact the case, and there is some cosmological basis for this, that it's understandable why in human history Mars was thought of as being yang, as being masculine, because in its cycle, it's the only one of the inner planets that attains opposition. So it can, in a sense, it could be seen from the perspective of the person looking at the sky as leaving the clutches of the earth, so it can make an entire circuit of the sky. So therefore that there's more of a sense of yangness to that. Well, Venus is like, can't get more than 47 or so degrees away from the earth. So almost every culture would project masculinity onto Mars and the feminine onto Venus. However, not always. In the Mayans actually was, because their whole base, the base of their calendar was Venus. And so Venus was like the common denominator of everything. And they're the only culture I know of, pardon me, that saw Venus going through a sex change. So there was a feminine and a masculine version of Venus, but that's rare to see that. So we have decided to use the cosmology of Venus representing the archetypal feminine and Mars, the archetypal masculine. Now, let me pause for a moment and let's hear from Shiva. What is it? You're are going to be the one who holds this together for 19 months. What brings you to your interest in this topic? What would you like to share based on this framework and these opening comments as I've made?
Fantastic, Daniel. It's lovely to be here with you. And I'm so looking forward to start this cycle, because it's also my own Venus return, my 5x8 Venus return, which is the magic number for Venus. So it's very exciting at this time to be able, with the overstory of Leo, to initiate this. And I just want to take a moment to say how grateful I am for this teaching that you have shared. And through doing the research, I mean, it's just studying the synodic cycle, you realize how much time it takes to figure out these cycles and put it together. But then trying to chart the Venus cycle and doing it old school with the ephemeris, just realizing how much you have to go back and forth to realize and see that pattern in the lines. That's really impressive. And I really invite other people to try to do that, to get a better sense and understanding of what kind of a dance it is in the sky, but also how much work it takes to realize that and be able to communicate it. So thank you for that. And I'm so excited that we get at this as the school.
Well, it's interesting because during that time in 1997, when I was in the Mimbres River Valley, there were so many, I was so excited by this. There were so many nights I didn't sleep. I was just back in the office, just, this is not using the computer, but just, going, let me try to figure this out,
I can see that.
over a period of time. And it was just incredibly exciting but the idea was, though, that it was all based upon naked eye observation. Nothing, nothing abstract, as far as, the conjunction. No, that's why we always start the beginning of the cycle with the heliacal rise, as all the ancients did, right? So we do it that way. And I think maybe the next thing we should talk about is that what will be included in the offerings,
Right. So we are hoping to have our free preview of the event, which you would probably guide us more through how this would unfold. But the basic structure of it would be that, including me and many of our other members and presenters from the school, that we're gonna have different offerings, from ceremonial offerings, ways of participating with the cycle, different formats of ceremony, where we're hoping to work with the herbs to ground the sky more into the plants and planets, basically, to be able to ground the planets into our bodies and into the physical. But one of the most exciting part of working with this cycle is that this is one of the biggest dramas that is playing in the galactic screen.
Yes, yes.
To be able to actually walk through it and see how the two archetypes are interacting in different signs and where they are in their individual journey, and then put that story together. I mean, we were talking shortly before this video started that there isn't that much research. You've done personally some work with your own relationship patterns and how the sagas were playing in different times in your life. But it is just so much more info that we can get, and hopefully it's a way to be able to bring the masculine and feminine really back together, which is the purpose
Yes.
of, I think, the turning of the ages this time, and the school, and what you have been trying to do personally in the astrological world.
Well, I'm just to just add on to this as far as what is going to happen in each of the times we meet over the Venus Moon conjunctions, and even when Venus is in the different underworlds, interior and exterior underworld. Um, there will be one portion that will be like the teaching part, but that's not just the structure to understand in a left brain way, like how the cycles work and interact with each other, but also the mythic background on it. The old stories that like the Rapunzel story, the Inanna and Dumuzi story. There's a number of them that we can bring up regarding the underworld, and around also the Great Saga. But it's like these projected stories are had always been there because they existed even before individual horoscopes. Because the idea about your own individual chart, that didn't happen until about 600 BC. But for long periods of time, the way that people who tuned into the sky, they would look at the dance of Venus and Mars, among other things, and that would be the bigger story, which is why we call it the overstories for Venus and Mars. So there'll be a certain teaching aspect. Then a very large part of it will be the sharing, which is based upon the group that forms, which will be like a community that goes through an entire Venus cycle with Mars. And then there will be a ceremonial aspect, of which there'll be some part of that that will be in the monthly meetings. But there will be a wide variety of suggestions, because we're all of how else to do ceremony, like outside or with a group, or different ways of doing it. And as you said, I mean, we can include plants and herbs and stones and potions and elixirs and
All allies.
right. Or as this my a friend of mine who is a Bavarian witch used to always say, the are flowers are the stars of the earth. So you have the different connection between planets, and this is an astrosophy, stars and planets with the earth itself.
I
And
heard a beautiful one that they say plants are terrestrial planets and planets are celestial plants. And I love
yeah,
that.
yeah, it's really great. And so we have, actually, as you said, I mean, we have a whole team here that are individuals that either have just finished their Venus returns, and that's another subject about what the power
Right.
of the Venus return, beyond the scope of our conversation here today. But we have Mariana who'll be part of it. We have Mary Kern, who's part of our council. Carway, who's part of our council, will be always, I think, there representing the masculine. And also, who did I leave out? If I left out anyone there. Oh, of course, Sobian,
Sylvian.
right, who's been a fully certified shamanic astrologer for, oh my gosh, for a long time, actually. And so that'll be a team, and I'll be there on a fairly regular basis also, because we have to represent the masculine as much as the feminine, I mean, that's the whole point of this, really. And we hope to have more men join the group who are not intimidated by the fact, oh, Venus is, the goddess only. No, there will be no use of the expression meta goddess here. This is the archetypal feminine and masculine here. Okay, now there's another ingredient, really, really important when you do bring in Mars, and when you open it up to realize Venus is not just for women and Mars is not just for men. And that is one of the key teachings in our school, and that is the inner sacred marriage process. And so that men, in understanding the Venus cycle, gives them a greater understanding of women or the archetypal feminine and vice versa. However, ultimately, even if, whether you're having great experiences in your relationship life or whether it's been the great challenge, the whole point from a spiritual psychological level is that you bring them together in what we call the inner sacred marriage. And to give an example of that, I'd like to actually bring in, making a special guest appearance, Lynne.
Yeah,
You ready?
yeah.
And this is Lynne, who is my wife of about 10 years or so, 12 years, and she's going to share a little bit about how the inner sacred marriage process operates. Actually, just you can just come here. I'll move over a little bit,
Okay.
and so
Hello,
sure.
Lynne. Good
Hi.
to see you. Thank you for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you for always supporting Daniel's work.
Now
Thanks
you
for
see, the
sharing your
interesting thing is I met Lynne at a Venus return and Venus and Mars time, and you were in a Venus return.
Yeah, so okay, I'm just gonna share a little how I apply knowing the Venus and Mars cycles in our my life and our relationship. So I met Daniel when I was 31 years old because I I was getting a reading from him because I was after this other surfer guy. And he told me that, you know, you're Venus and Taurus, you are the honey, so you wait for the guys to make the move. But somehow I didn't follow his advice. And now looking back, I was also in my Mars return, Mars and Leo. And I actually went for the guy, but then I changed the guy, made it him. So I'm so glad I didn't follow that advice because um, actually it took me a while to gather the courage to do my own Leo and present myself to him in a sense. So okay. Um, another another way that um, knowing the opposite gender's Mars or Venus cycle, how it helps us is I know that when Daniel has his Venus return, I know that he also has Venus conjunct Saturn. So he's kind of more sensitive during that time, like in a Saturn way. So I support that, and you know, like so I kind of changed the way I act so that instead of him reacting to the Venus Saturn being at the effect of that, then it actually helps our relationship. Um, what was it? Another uh also knowing what Daniel's Venus is helps me understand what his projections might be onto me, whether helpful or not. And also him knowing my Mars, you know, Mars and Leo, then he would also know how, why I react a certain way, why I might be projecting it, even though he's not trying to act Leo, you know. So
Mhm,
that's very helpful for a relationship to know your opposite genders,
mhm.
cycles, and
And
archetypes.
archetypes,
Archetypes, yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
And then ultimately, though, the whole purpose of that, if you have a relationship that understands these projections this way and know what cycles you're in, then it helps to
Hmm.
do the inner work to be able to unify that so that the I can own the fact that I would always project criticism coming from the feminine
Hmm.
and to be able to take that inside and to realize I hadn't done anything wrong, or even if I did, it's just a way to learn. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And the same thing for you to rather than only project Leo onto me, but to become more of that yourself.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so then that's the union of Venus and Mars, which we call in the school the inner sacred marriage process. And it's really worked. I mean, although in a sense, I mean, if I could say, uh, up until that age 64 time, and that'll be incidentally one of the key factors in the learning as we go through the whole course, the whole time period of the cycle, is the 32-year cycle. which is just huge, because you go back 32 years, 64 years, 96 years, you basically get the exact same pattern, and so these magic things happen at the 32 year point. That for me, because of that Saturn Venus, the women I would choose to be with, it was brutal. So I bet you could, the criticism, So I mean, basically, by the time we met, I kind of knew a lot about this, and so it ends up that while she's Virgo rising, exactly on my Venus Saturn conjunction, it's like I had enough previous experience of the sacred marriage to be able to recognize the magic of who she was.
Although the first when after we married, the first Venus cycle that he had, I was like, oh, will Saturn happen?
Yeah.
So I was afraid, oh, will this be our breakup time? And I suppose because we consciously work with a Saturn, then and we made the quote bad into the good, kind of like that. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So this reminds me to bring one other factor up in our conversation here today, which is that this will happen a bit in the free preview. So we have this pre-preview coming up on the 19th, where a longer presentation to explain more, like why would you want to be in our Venus Mars community going forward. But the reason why I thought it was really valuable to have Lynne here and to give a little bit of her experience about this, and she's a fully certified astrologer also, she's taken all the classes, she knows it really well, is that we're going to emphasize a bit, it's not like this is only for couples or something, but a lot of the presenters have relationships, and we'll be able to see how this works with couples like you and Tony, or Mary and Chris, or Daniel and Lynn, or
It's a great testimony. It worked, so people can see how it
about what
works.
the experience is and what a person is still working out, with the different projections,
Also,
go ahead, Lynn. Go ahead.
Also knowing, let's say for me, I know knowing what my Mars is and my descendant helps me in a sense narrow down who to go for, in a sense, for single people or those looking for part, rather than just keeping on going for the wrong types. And then even if you get them, you won't be satisfied in that sense. So might as well work with your chart, even if that guy first has to help you eventually do your own sacred marriage, with or without him present all the time.
And that was one of the things, if a person has a really challenging situation on the chart between Venus and Mars, or on Venus or on Mars, then the advantage of the inner sacred marriage process is that you're not at the effect of it externally, and you realize that internalized version of Venus or Mars becomes your closest and deepest friend. It's like it's a part of your own soul that loves you unconditionally, and you don't have to prove yourself to it. So it's really about self-love, ultimately.
So I'm just laughing because sometimes Daniel, because I'm Virgo rising, he has Venus in Virgo, and he projects the Virgo Saturn onto me. And even if I didn't do anything, sometimes I do it intentionally and tell him enjoy Saturn, because
yeah,
and so that he gets reminded, oh right,
Actually, I've had the great advantage over the years of also, before I really was able to not take it personally, of the advantage of, at one point in my first marriage, where Debbie would say something like, I can just tell now you're about to believe I'm going to criticize you.
Right.
And it was true, and so she would actually sense into it, and then I was like, yeah, you're right, so, but this just our own, this is all based upon our own individual archetypes, but this would apply in so many different ways, and we'll be able to explore all of this as we go through the entire Venus Leo Overstory, which is then going to be the emphasis on who is that expression of the sacred feminine, the Leo one. And what does that mean for men who might be at the effect of the Leo expression of the feminine, or they might even have Venus and Leo, or and so on. It's like how to understand that, how to be with that, how to incorporate that internally, because that is the essence of the Leo expression of the sacred feminine is sovereignty, being creator, and you can make it up any way you want. I mean, it is a very strong Amazonian expression of the feminine, the solar feminine. You know, it's not mother nurture or feminine in any way. So that's going to be a very interesting time for the feminine, very different than the Capricornian one that we're exiting. And it's so fun, Shiva, to have you be the prime facilitator here, because you are, of course, going to be in your Venus return. And I believe when we talked about this weeks ago, or months ago, you said, I'd like to be able to just ceremonialize and be with the entire Venus cycle of the Venus return. And so here we are. We've created a whole event, and boy, it's about time to do it this way, because it is a cornerstone of the entire philosophy and foundation of the Turning of the Ages Mystery School. So maybe let me turn it over to you for some final comments, and maybe we can leave. Oh, go ahead, Lynn.
Oh, nothing else.
Okay. So we can leave it there. And I think we've given a pretty good overview of why we're doing this, why it's important. So since you're going to be so prominent in this, I'll give you the final word here.
Thank you, Danielle. If you remember, I started my studies. We had readings, but I started my studies during a sacred marriage cycle. And the first course you recommend me to take was the sacred marriage, because I've already read the handbook a good 7 to 8 times. You're like, okay, you need this course, just take this first. And it was phenomenal. It was a Pluto squaring my Mars. So the sacred marriage was related to my Mars, not Venus. But it was such a profound time, and first time I went through something like that consciously. And the details of the story, but this really works. It's a magic that has been told in the basis, the science that we work with, the Hermetic science, as above, so below. This thing really works. It's a real enactment of alchemy to be done during a massive cycle like this. And I think it works for our relationship present, our relationships in the future, but also the relationships of the past, because once you see this and how it unfolds, you can go back through all the heartache, all the places that you have resentment, and you see your archetype, you see the other person archetype, and it gives you like a next level of forgiveness and compassion. So it's really a profound story, and I'm so excited we get to finally have this in a complete way, how you imagined it. And I hope everybody else join us on this journey. It's going to be exciting.
Yeah, hope you join us for the free preview coming up on the 19th, and there'll be stuff in the next newsletter about it also. So thank you, Shiva, for being part of this with us today, Lynn for joining, and I look forward to it very much also. So till then, all right, bye.